Hello and welcome to the Godscast at Graphic Policy. This is episode 3, covering issue 3 of The Wicked and the Divine. My name is Steven.
And I am Chris.
So, this issue starts with yet another transition from a head to a head. So we have a cover of the Morrigan looking extremely gothy, and then we cut to her beheaded head.
I have to correct you here.
Mm-hmm.
I am headed up to San Francisco Pride this weekend and to see a show by a friend of mine who is sort of trying to invigorate the goth drag scene in San Francisco.
Uh-huh.
So calling this gothy is a bit pedestrian.
Okay, all right,
So-
fair enough. This
And
is
all of this will become relevant later as we discuss what comes on here.
right.
So.
This is where I need help because I don't know a lot of these subcultures super well. Like in high school I was goth adjacent, but that was mostly because me and the goths were both, geeks. But I was not, of that subculture. I couldn't really pull off the all black. So we move from a head to a head, and then it's this sort of really funny tonal shift because it starts with this potentially horrific image, right? A decapitated human head, bleeding everywhere, and then he chucks the head into the audience, and it turns into this rain of puns. Where he's talking about headliners and and it clear it's just such a strange comedic shift. I was curious what you thought of this.
I had to roll my eyes pretty hard here.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I don't know if you or our listener is familiar with the Boulet brothers.
Nope.
Okay, so they are an LA main staple, but what they tend to do is they throw lots of parties, and there's a lot of what they call extreme kind of visual effects and outfits that tend to veer towards the very gross and disturbing. So
Right.
they recently started doing a show on YouTube where they'd RuPaul's Drag Race, only they're really dark, but there's kind of a professional wrestling quality to the whole thing where you can't
Gotcha.
really take
Okay.
it seriously. I mean, one of the gimmicks is instead of the eliminated queens walking off the stage and going home, they film a short scene of them being murdered. And it's really
Gotcha.
silly. And here, this is what I'm getting, is this cross between Boulet Brothers and professional wrestling, where this is
Right.
clearly staged. I can't take any of this seriously. I was a little worried for whoever's head that actually was dressed up to be the Morrigan, but once she starts talking, I'm like, oh, this is all a show, and I'm not feeling it. It's just, I can't suspend my disbelief here. I don't like gore enough to just sort of enjoy the aesthetics of it.
Yeah, it's very juvenile. We see a couple pages, he's talking about giving people excellent head. It's nihilistic, right? The whole thing about abandon all hope, ye who enter here, being tattooed on birth canals. It's slightly anti-elitist, culturally speaking. The whole T.S. Eliot is an anagram of toilets, because T.S. Eliot was very much a kind of cultural elitist. And then then we actually see the real Morrigan, and she is very dramatic and very angry.
Okay, so here I got confused. So the woman with black paint on her face, the head, is not the Morrigan. The Morrigan is the redhead.
Well, this is a little bit confusing. So the Morrigan actually we see in this issue is 3 people, or 3 appearances. Right, the main one, Morrigan, is the one with the black hair and the straight band across the eyes. Right, and then there is Bobbed. I don't know how that's pronounced because it's Celtic and I can't pronounce Celtic. and she's the redhead with like the kind of triangular eye shadow. Um, and then there is Gentle Annie, who is the like bald character with like the one vertical stripe.
Okay, so these are
And those are all Morgans.
okay, so these are all three manifestations of a single god, and they only occupy one circle in the thing. Then,
Yeah, it's sort of a 3-in-1 kind of thing.
gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now because I was starting to wonder. Like, I think I counted more names than there were sigils, but now the
Yeah.
math works.
Yeah. So what did you think of her character?
Like I said, this entire scene is just so stagey that it's hard to really feel what Laura is feeling in the fear and the darkness of what these people are putting on. It feels trying too hard.
Yeah. Because like on one level, right, there's all this kind of like Corn King Wicker Man esque lingo about like the Morrigan is queen and he's the king, but he doesn't have a crown. She's the triple queen. But at the same level, like she gets just as juvenile as he does, because like she's, basically she's calling him a needle dick, and she's like, you've got a tiny penis. Which is particularly like you can see it very specifically pisses him off because he has such an idealized kind of male body, right? Just impossible levels of muscles. Um, so she's sort of, going straight at his machismo. Um, but there's also like this kind of disagreement between them about death, which is kind of interesting, where he's sort of insinuating that she thinks they're immortal and he thinks they're dead. Um, and I think when like Laura picks up the head and like does the kind of alas poor Yorick thing, like that's kind of a critique, and it's one that the Morrigan accepts, that like they're playing badly. They're like, you know, they're hamming it up, and it's not really, it's not affecting you, the audience. It's not affecting their audience.
Yeah, and it feels very. It makes me wonder how old these two were when they became gods, because there's a very teenage
Yes,
quality to
absolutely.
the performance they're putting on.
Yeah. One thing I did want to note, because it's really interesting, bringing back that whole like triune god thing. The Morrigan can switch who she is consciously, because we see her doing the 1 2 3 4, and she goes from being Bob back to being Morrigan.
Yeah, which makes more sense now that I understand that that's what she's doing, and there's not
Yeah.
two separate women standing here.
Yeah. And what's kind of interesting is what happens next. Like the Baphomet is clearly like having, like, he responds to Laura's thing, where he sort of says, "What is it? She's right, and she's crazy pretentious. Always had a soft spot for that." Um, and they kind of have like, I don't know what you'd call it. Like it's almost like a sing off, like a battle of the bands kind of thing. Um, and it's the first time that we've ever seen like two gods at once do the 1 2 3 4 thing. Um, and Laura seems to suggest that like this has never happened before, as far as she knows. Um, and it has this like dark hallucinatory effect, which I thought was kind of interesting.
I got the sunken place that this was more psychological.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I do not know if darkness is actually descending on the tunnel, or this is just everyone's going into some kind of trance.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably the latter, because when the police show up and shoot Baphomet in the back with the rubber bullet, um, I get the sense that like they could see the whole thing, and everyone else, like you can sort of see them a little bit on the third panel of that page. Like everyone else is on the ground, kind of trancing out. Um, which is, I think that like that's what kind of the whole like there's kind of like a cone in, cone out effect with the weird kind of black stuff on the sides of the panel.
Right.
So you sort of get the sense of like you're sort of what it reminds me a little bit of is the one time when um, this is a weird personal anecdote, but I had the flu once and there was no food in the house, so like I went out to a local McDonald's and I was like could only finish half my food and I was feeling really bad and I was like, okay, I'd better get myself home. And I passed out like going through the doors, but it was that sort of like, fade in effect. Like I lost peripheral vision and it just sort of like tunneled in. And then all of a sudden I woke up. And that's what it kind of reminds me of.
Yeah, it makes me wonder it's clearly they are capable of more exciting demonstrations of what they can do. And
Yeah.
I feel like they're starting one now and it gets interrupted by the cops. Is being called out on their bullshit part of their plan?
It's a good question. Like, was it always supposed to be a duet?
Well, not just that, but like, are they counting on a heckler saying, this is stupid?
That's a good point. I don't know. Like that's a very meta thing, and like I could see them doing that.
I would have a lot more respect for them if that was the case, because I was just not feeling the first couple pages of this.
Yeah. So then like Baphomet sets a cop on fire. And the Morrigan seemingly brings the cop back from the dead, and that's like, I mean, even more so than the heads exploding, right? I think that's the most like dramatic use of like miracles that we've seen yet. Although it's interesting, like I went back to compare it to the judge, and like this is very yellow and that was very red.
Yeah, I see.
So it's a slightly different effect.
And burning is not a.
So what'd you think of that?
It opens a lot of possibilities here. So I'm a little curious if he actually succumbed to his wounds and Annie brought him back. Is that a power that people have, or is it just healing? Is this something?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Is dying and coming back something that people want to experience?
Yeah, and another question is like, so does she have different powers depending on who she is?
I assume that is the case. She's got these 3 distinct personalities. I'm assuming Bob is some kind of evil incarnate, and Annie is the reverse of that.
Yeah, well, Bob certainly is like anger incarnate. I mean, this is the so to give you the like Wikipedia, Morrigan is a Celtic war goddess. Like she's associated with crows, and that's why we see all that crow imagery, and also associated with fate. That like she's basically like she's the one who decides who wins battles.
So it's kind of parallel to the fates that we know from Greek mythology.
Yes, a bit more sort of war focused, and she is a triune goddess. Like she's often called like the 3 Morrigans. So that's where the sort of the imagery is coming from. So Laura goes, moving back to the plot, right? Laura shows up and like tries, she thinks that Baphomet's the suspect, and Morrigan gives him a sexual alibi. And then Laura gets arrested.
Yeah. I mean,
and has
I had to stop here and think, okay, so what is what are the authorities' roles here, and what position are they taking? Clearly, they don't like. I mean, Lucifer has identified herself as a threat to security, so I can see why
Yeah,
they'd
I
be
mean, she's in prison.
cracking down on her and her followers. What have they got against these teenagers playing in the dark with fake blood? So it makes me wonder, okay, has the government taken a position that all of these who claim to be gods are enemies? It doesn't feel real to me, because then everyone else would have to deal with the authorities barging down. So
Yeah,
I don't know why the
I
cops are
mean
here.
the other way of thinking about this is like they are trespassing in the subways. Like this is, I mean, imagine what would happen in like New York City, right? If someone decided to hold a concert, like, you know, in, you know, some subway station at like 2 in the morning. Like, I'm sure that they would send in the police to, if they found out about it, right? They'd send in the police to arrest people.
I
This seems
It seems overkill in that they're wearing SWAT gear, but then again,
yeah,
maybe they're not so different from our police in London, where they.
yeah. Well, I was also gonna think like, imagine there was like a musical scene in which one of the members of that musical scene had just blown the head off of a judge.
Mhm.
Like, I imagine the reaction would be like, the if they hear that there's like a concert with another group, that they would like have a bit of a freak out.
I don't remember Marilyn Manson concerts getting rated though.
That's true. But Marilyn Manson never killed a judge.
Yeah, they tried very hard to blame him and his music for Columbine. So
That's true.
if that
That's true.
if that happened today, I feel like Marilyn Manson might very well be in prison. So
Right. And there were like not criminal charges, but there were like, weren't there civil suits brought against like a bunch of heavy metal groups where like they were alleging that there were secret like messages if you played it backwards and stuff like that in the 80s? Am I
yeah, there were a lot
misremembering
of
that? Like,
those. We had quite a bit of fun with, once when we in the 90s, when in our dorm rooms we were like, we suddenly had the computer technology to test these theories,
mhm,
and they didn't work. So I think we might have tried to start one about the Grateful Dead just to see if anything would happen, but
right. So then we get a another meetup between Laura and Cassandra, the two sort of detectives.
we're not going to
But what
talk
the
about our
scene is really
parents.
for is, oh, okay. So what do you want to talk about the
I
parents?
mean,
Like, it's a very teenagey
yeah, it's
scene.
teenage angst, and I'm not here for it. Is all.
Fair enough. I did think it's interesting. Like, even though you don't get any dialogue, you definitely get a little bit of a sense of the parental relationship, where like the dad is kind of standing off to the side, and it's really a fight between mom and daughter.
Yeah, and I wonder if the racial dynamics of this family are going to come into play at any point.
Ah, good question.
It seems like a conscious, like, important choice that they went with um, a biracial protagonist.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, something to keep our eye on for the future. So okay. So Laura and Cassandra meet up, and the scene is kind of done as like, it's sort of funny. It's like a call and response between two people who aren't actually in the same room, because it's Cassandra's take on Lucifer's take on the
Hmm.
pantheon. Um, and you sort of, I really like this because I feel like you get a real sense of both of their personalities. So Lucifer thinks that Tara is like super pretentious,
Yeah,
right? And Cassandra very much agrees. Um, the uh, the interesting thing is, so what did you think about the way that Lucifer described Amaterasu?
She's a sappy cow. She cries when she passes adverts for free-range eggs. She's also my best friend. Um, this set off some alarm bells here. In that
Okay.
they made a point of showing us Amaterasu. She's our introduction to the world of gods, and yet all we
Yeah.
know about her is this secondhand account. So
Yeah. I mean, we get a little bit from the interview, but she's like in the first issue, but she's very posturing in that interview. So like this is much more the personal side. And it's like she's sentimental. She's like, you know, very hippy dippy.
she's painted as a sweetheart, but I think we can all trust that
Yes, and
gods
I
are
also
not
like,
sweethearts ever.
yeah, and I think we get a sense of like what their relationship is, because Lucifer is very prickly, and it seems like she kind of like goes out of her way to fuck with her friends and fuck with everybody really. Um, so then we get the thing about Ananke, and this is where I kind of got the like rebellious child parent
It's
thing.
very Lucifer.
Like she's disappointed. Yeah. Um, and um, so what did you think about the thing about Inanna and Baal?
So Inanna, we haven't seen Inanna on the page, have we?
Right. No,
So
we
in
haven't. We've had him
and it's a
described.
him. At least it,
Yes, which is interesting because Inanna, the god, right, from
yeah.
mythology, is female.
And I know that's from reading Snow Crash, another book on Sumerian
Yeah.
pantheon. It's hard to get a sense of what these gods really are like. We have their personalities from Lucifer's point of view, and Lucifer doesn't really have any reason to lie here, but at the same time,
Right.
there's so much branding that goes into all of how these gods exist that
Yeah.
I don't know that even Lucifer
And
is capable of
very
separating the
much like,
two.
yeah, because Lucifer is very much responding to in character. Like, you know, her thing on Inanna is like she wanted to dirty him up. Like she wanted, like, she's playing Lucifer, right? She's trying to tempt him to like,
Hmm.
make him sin essentially. Which is funny because like she's portraying Inanna as like this sort of sexual libertine. Um, and the then this brings up the issue of Baal, where like it's asserted that Baal was sleeping with
Right.
Inanna, and that Baal may be closeted
Is this felt
because she's.
really out of place to me because
Mhm.
one, this is 2014. Two, sexual
Yeah.
shame just does not seem to be a thing in the pantheon.
Well, I mean, it certainly is not a thing for Lucifer,
It's
definitely,
or any of the
or
others. I
Sekhmet,
mean, like
who
we've seen the Morrigan has said that she's sleeping with Baphomet, or one of her personalities is sleeping with Baphomet. Um, Lucifer is describing who she
yeah,
slept with.
as pretty much everybody, except for Minerva because she's 12 and even Lucifer is not that gross. Now, uh, another thing that's kind of interesting. So I just want to sort of like tee up one thing for the past, for the future, and then get more into this issue of godly identities that we talked about in episode 2. So Lucifer says there's more of this like running trope about Lucifer. That Woden has inappropriate thoughts about Asian girls, and Cassandra, who is Asian herself, like has
Hmm.
clearly had some contact with Woden and is like viscerally
Him
creeped
or
out
her? Do
by
we
him.
know if Odin's a man or a woman, or somewhere in between? Okay.
He's
we go.
staring. Yeah. And then we get into this issue of Ball. And this is where, like, remember we talked about in the previous episode, like,
Mm-hmm.
which Ball are we talking about? And there's, like, as she points out, there's multiple balls. Right? And one of the balls has, like, actual
Mm-hmm.
archaeological history of child sacrifice. And then Ball himself shows up in a bright red McQueen suit, looking
Mm-hmm.
very like superhero pose. And that's sort of like the end of the issue. It's like all of a sudden a god has shown up and is pissed at them
Right.
because
So can
they're
we
being
pause
haters.
at this page? Because once again, we're looking at the sigils, and
Sure.
I can only identify 2 or 3 of them. So
Okay. So let's go around, starting from the top.
okay, the sun, I have no clue.
So
Okay.
the sunburst at the top, that's
The
Amaterasu,
pentacle.
right? It sort
Really?
of goes in
Okay.
order
We
of
have
gods that we've met
Amaterasu
in some cases. Well, at least for some of them. So
is clearly Satan,
who the one behind
or Lucifer.
bars,
Sekhmet,
right? Yeah,
Baphomet. The
right.
owl is the Morrigan.
Yeah.
The owl is Minerva.
No, the owl is Minerva, right? Because Minerva's symbol is the
Okay, so
Athena has
I
her
actually
owl.
learned this in college because I almost minored in classics for a bit. Are we talking the Roman Minerva pre what's the word? Cultural appropriation of the Greek gods, or are we talking about just the second name of Athena?
That's a very good question.
The owl suggests it's the
I
same
don't know
one,
yet.
but I mean I don't know. It seems like a
Right.
very uncommon fact that Minerva had a personality before she became the second incarnation of Athena. So
Right. Okay, so the next one down, the horned helmet or the winged helmet.
I want to say that's the Morgan, but that's Woden.
That's Woden. The Morrigan
Okay,
is
the
the next
skull
one.
with the
She's the
bandana-ish
skull
thing.
in reverse.
All right, who?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's the eyes thing. Yeah. And she's got the same marking on her eyes. Okay, the starburst. I mean, you don't have any
Okay,
way of knowing this yet, but that's Inanna.
and the drama.
The comedy
Okay,
tragedy.
and then of
That's
course this one's
Tara.
Ball.
And
Okay,
then
so and I want
yeah,
to
that's Ball.
that
And
yeah,
there's
there's 2 we don't know about who could likely be suspects. Or is it telling us that these gods have not been have not returned yet? And because Laura is banking a lot on the fact that on the idea that she can become a god, which I think is very stupid. In that, one,
yes.
just because you are you doesn't mean you are special enough to get this, and 2, you're again assuming that wanting it is put into the calculation of whether you get it. Because
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a lot of like kids who chase stardom in general. Like, how many kids go into playing high school, and then college sports and want to become, NBA or NFL players, given that like only a tiny percentage
well, having
ever
grown
get
up in
there.
Texas, like being
How
a high school
many kids?
star of the football team is a
Oh yeah,
peak in itself. So that I kind of understand. But the ones who go on America's Got
yeah,
Talent, I think, is the more appropriate.
yeah, yeah. It's like a vanishing small percentage of people, but like it sometimes can be hard to like not want. Hey, I wanted to be I was a theater kid in high school and I never went anywhere, but I can see the attraction. Um, but what puts sort of more of a point on it, I think, is that like, this is everything that Laura wants, but like, it's not just that you get
Mhm.
your 15 minutes of fame, you die. That's taking the whole like James Dean thing to like a really
Well,
freaky
I'm
level.
wondering, like, do they? Because Ananke says, "I've missed you."
Ah,
So clearly there's some continuity. Now, whether it's the same
yes.
consciousness, this is an argument I will have till the end of days. Like, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, but I'm not getting
Yeah.
in the Star Trek teleporter because they are destroying you and creating a copy.
Okay, so you would not sign up for the
Uh,
Delos Corporation brand of
I
immortality
wouldn't not sign
to
up,
use a
but I
different fame.
also would not count on that being extending my life.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always of the belief that like kind of continuity of consciousness is a little bit tricky, just given the fact that we go to sleep every day. But
I
we are going really off topic.
Sorry, I thought it was relevant into
So
what
I
she's
am going.
after
Sorry, yeah.
because I don't think she's buying that the death is the
No,
end.
no, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's the whole like I think sort of subtextual thing that this is about so far is like, what does it mean to be immortal, right? Like you go all the way back to the Iliad, right? It's the whole thing about like, is immortality like this, incredible brief life that makes you famous and you'll be remembered forever, or is it like, having descendants and a normal life and the whole, you're alive as long as you're remembered kind of thing. And she seems to be like very much like,
She's
I
here for a
want my
good time, not
15
a
minutes
long
of fame.
time, as it goes.
Yeah. Um, okay, so why don't we leave it there, and we will move on to issue number 4. So, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Just as I did last time, if you want to hear me talk about incongruous rules of gods and monsters and poor fashion choices in the 90s with all the khaki, listen to Unspoiled Buffy the Vampire Slayer on the Unspoiled
Okay,
Network. So my best friend and I, we go through Buffy. I've never seen it, surprisingly.
cool.
So
Yeah,
anyway, check us
and
out. We're
you can
funny.
find all of my stuff about A Song of Ice and Fire on Race for the Iron Throne .wordpress.com, and you can find my writings about the intersection of history, politics, and comic books on Graphic Policy. And now I'm going to do a 10 count and talk some spoiler talk. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, I mean, there's two like big things that I want to talk about in this issue. One of which is how much the revelation of um, that the Morrigan has been physically abusing Baphomet changes the way that we interpret their first scene. That she is very well. First of all, she's like running him down in a very sexual way, which is kind of strange given their their relationship. She is also very angry and possessive right off the bat. That like she doesn't want um, other people to see him. There's like this very strong sense of compartmentalization. Baphomet talks about, uh, you know, she doesn't want anyone to see her bad side. Um, she doesn't like that like Baphomet likes Laura, which is kind of prescient given that they're gonna be sleeping together. The other thing that I wanted to tee up is the Ball identity. That we'll be talking about this more in the next issue, but um, Ball actually is Bal Haman, and he's pretending not to be. And this is a very recent revelation, and what that makes us think about his character. So I'm going to leave it there, and we will see you next episode.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.